It is better to decide than to be forced to decide. Napoleon Bonaparte. Most people believe success is about isolated moments, the lucky break, the perfect pitch, the viral tweet. They chase fleeting opportunities, reacting to the immediate like moths to a flame. This is the illusion. The truth is, victory rarely springs from a single action. It's the culmination of a long game, a series of calculated moves played out over time. We are not interested in luck. We are interested in systems. We are interested in designing our own luck. They see the chessboard and only focus on the next move, oblivious to the grand strategy unfolding. They optimize for short-term gains, sacrificing long-term advantage. They are trapped in a reactive cycle, constantly putting out fires instead of building a fireproof foundation. They fixate on the individual battle, not the overall war. This is why they fail to see the patterns, the underlying currents that determine the flow of events. We, on the other hand, understand that every action, no matter how small, contributes to the larger narrative. Their world is a series of disconnected events, a chaotic landscape of random occurrences. They believe in instant gratification, in overnight success. They are easily swayed by trends and fads, chasing the next shiny object. They lack the patience to cultivate lasting results, the discipline to stay the course. They are blind to the power of compounding, to the exponential growth that comes from consistent, strategic effort. We operate on a different plane. We see the interconnectedness of everything, the delicate balance of cause and effect. We understand that true success is not about sprinting, but about building a sustainable engine. We are not afraid to delay gratification, to sacrifice short-term gains for long-term dominance. We are masters of the long game, architects of our own destiny. We see the entire board, not just the next square. Their thinking is linear, confined to the immediate horizon. They fail to anticipate the consequences of their actions, the ripple effects that extend far beyond their limited field of vision. They are prisoners of the present, unable to break free from the constraints of their own short-sightedness. They react to events as they unfold, always one step behind. They are forever playing catch-up, perpetually chasing a goal that remains just out of reach. Our vision is expansive, encompassing the past, present, and future. We anticipate potential obstacles, plan for contingencies, and adapt to changing circumstances. We see the long-term implications of every decision, the cascading effects that shape the landscape for years to come. We proactively create our own opportunities, shaping the environment to our advantage. We are always several moves ahead, dictating the terms of engagement. They are swayed by emotions, driven by fear and greed. They make impulsive decisions based on instinct rather than analysis. They are easily manipulated, their actions predictable and easily exploited. They are slaves to their own impulses, unable to resist the temptation of instant gratification. They crumble under pressure, their emotions clouding their judgment. We are guided by reason, driven by logic and data. We make calculated decisions based on careful analysis and strategic foresight. We are immune to manipulation, our actions deliberate and purposeful. We are masters of our own emotions, using them to our advantage, not allowing them to control us. We thrive under pressure, our minds sharp and focused. Their approach is fragmented, lacking a cohesive strategy. They flit from one tactic to another, never committing to a long-term plan. They are scattered and unfocused, their efforts diluted and ineffective. They lack the discipline to execute consistently, the resilience to overcome setbacks. They are easily discouraged, giving up at the first sign of adversity. Our approach is holistic, guided by a clear and unwavering vision. We develop comprehensive strategies, meticulously planned and flawlessly executed. We are focused and disciplined, our efforts concentrated and amplified. We possess the resilience to overcome any obstacle, the perseverance to see our plans through to completion. We are relentless in our pursuit of excellence, never settling for anything less than victory. We build systems to win. The ability to delay gratification is not merely a virtue, it's a fundamental requirement for strategic thinking. The human mind, when untrained, is wired for immediate satisfaction. This primitive instinct, once essential for survival, becomes a liability in the complex landscape of the long game. The pursuit of instant pleasure blinds individuals to potential future gains, trapping them in a cycle of short-sighted decisions. They sacrifice long-term success for fleeting moments of enjoyment, perpetually hindering their own progress. True strategists, on the other hand, cultivate the discipline to resist these urges, recognizing that the greatest rewards often lie far beyond the horizon of immediate gratification. They understand that patience is not simply a virtue, but a powerful weapon in the arsenal of the long game. Consider the concept of sunk cost fallacy, a common trap for those who lack a long-term perspective. They become fixated on past investments, both in terms of time and resources, and are unable to cut their losses, even when faced with overwhelming evidence that a particular course of action is no longer viable. This emotional attachment to past decisions prevents them from making rational judgments, leading them to pour more and more resources into a losing battle. A strategist, however, approaches each decision with cold detachment, evaluating the current situation without being clouded by past investments. They are willing to abandon a failing strategy, regardless of the resources already committed, if a more promising opportunity presents itself. This ability to detach from past failures and embrace new possibilities is a key differentiator between those who play the long game and those who are trapped by their own past. Furthermore, emotional regulation plays a pivotal role in maintaining a long-term focus. Anger, fear, and anxiety can all cloud judgment and lead to impulsive decisions. Someone driven by anger might lash out, jeopardizing carefully laid plans. Someone paralyzed by fear may miss crucial opportunities. A strategist cultivates emotional detachment, observing their feelings without allowing them to dictate their actions. They understand that emotions are data points, not commands. They can acknowledge the feeling of fear, for example, but still proceed with a calculated risk if the potential reward justifies it. This mastery over one's own emotions is not about suppressing them, but about understanding them and using them to inform, rather than control, decision-making. It is about maintaining a clear head in the face of adversity, ensuring that every action is aligned with the overall strategic objective. The long game also requires a shift in perspective, moving from a reactive to a proactive mindset. Those trapped in a short-term frame of mind are constantly reacting to external events, putting out fires as they arise. They are perpetually on the defensive, always playing catch-up. Strategists, however, anticipate potential challenges and opportunities, preparing for them in advance. They don't simply react to the game, they shape it to their advantage. This proactive approach requires a deep understanding of the underlying dynamics of the system, as well as the ability to predict future trends. It is about thinking several steps ahead, anticipating the consequences of each action, and positioning oneself for long-term success. This ability to anticipate and prepare is what separates those who are merely surviving from those who are truly thriving. Consider the example of a chess grandmaster. They don't simply react to their opponent's moves, they anticipate them, planning several moves ahead. They consider the long-term implications of each decision, not just the immediate consequences. They are not simply trying to win the current exchange. They are positioning themselves for a checkmate several moves down the line. This same principle applies to all areas of life. The ability to anticipate future events and prepare for them accordingly is a critical skill for anyone who wants to play the long game. Finally, the long game demands a fundamental understanding of systems thinking. Those with a short-term perspective tend to focus on isolated events, failing to see the interconnectedness of things. They treat symptoms rather than addressing the underlying causes. Strategists, however, understand that everything is connected, and that actions in one area can have unforeseen consequences in another. They adopt a holistic view, considering the entire system when making decisions. This allows them to identify leverage points, areas where small changes can have a significant impact on the overall system. It also helps them to avoid unintended consequences, ensuring that their actions are aligned with their long-term goals. Systems thinking is not just about understanding the relationships between things. It's about understanding how to manipulate those relationships to achieve a desired outcome. It is about recognizing that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that true success lies in optimizing the entire system, not just individual components. Therefore, cultivating the right mindset is not simply a matter of personal growth. It's a strategic imperative. The ability to delay gratification, regulate emotions, anticipate future events, and think systemically are all essential skills for anyone who wants to play the long game and achieve lasting success. Consider the rise and fall of Blockbuster Video. For years, they dominated the home entertainment market, a seemingly invincible giant. Their strategy was simple: saturate the market with brick-and-mortar stores, charge late fees, and offer a wide selection of movies and games. In the short term, this approach was incredibly successful, generating billions in revenue. However, Blockbuster failed to see the bigger picture, the shifting landscape of technology and consumer behavior. They dismissed the nascent streaming services like Netflix as a niche market, something that would never truly threaten their core business. This was a critical failure of strategic thinking, a classic example of prioritizing short-term gains over long-term vision. They were so focused on maintaining their existing market share that they completely missed the disruptive potential of the internet. Blockbuster executives were likely blinded by their own success, unable to imagine a world where physical stores and late fees were no longer the norm. They were emotionally invested in their current business model, unable to objectively assess the changing environment. This emotional attachment led to a series of poor decisions, each one compounding the initial mistake. They had opportunities to acquire Netflix early on, but they dismissed them as too risky or too expensive. They could have invested in their own streaming platform, but they were hesitant to cannibalize their existing revenue streams. In the end, Blockbuster's inability to adapt to the digital age led to its demise. They declared bankruptcy in 2010, a cautionary tale of what happens when a company fails to play the long game. Netflix, on the other hand, saw the writing on the wall. They recognized that the future of home entertainment was online, and they were willing to take risks to capitalize on that trend. Initially, Netflix was a DVD-by-mail service, a convenient alternative to Blockbuster's physical stores. But even as they built a successful mail-order business, they were already planning their next move. They understood that streaming was the ultimate destination, and they began investing heavily in infrastructure and content licensing. Netflix executives were not emotionally attached to the DVD business. They saw it as a stepping stone, a means to an end. They were willing to sacrifice short-term profits to build a long-term competitive advantage. This required a significant amount of foresight and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. The transition to streaming was not easy. It required a massive investment in technology and content, and it initially cannibalized their DVD business. But Netflix executives were confident that streaming was the future, and they were willing to weather the storm. Their bet paid off handsomely. As internet speeds increased and streaming technology improved, Netflix's subscriber base exploded. They became the dominant player in the streaming market, a position they still hold today. The difference between Blockbuster and Netflix was not just about technology, it was about mindset. Blockbuster was focused on preserving the past, while Netflix was focused on building the future. Blockbuster reacted emotionally to the changing environment, while Netflix made calculated moves based on strategic foresight. This is the essence of the long game. It's about seeing beyond the immediate horizon, anticipating future trends, and making decisions that will pay off in the long run. It requires a willingness to adapt, to innovate, and to take risks. It also requires a certain amount of emotional detachment, the ability to see the world objectively, without being blinded by personal biases or emotional attachments. The story of Blockbuster and Netflix illustrates the power of strategic thinking and the importance of playing the long game. One company clung to the past and ultimately failed, while the other embraced the future and achieved unprecedented success. The lesson is clear. In a rapidly changing world, those who can think strategically and plan for the long term are the ones who will ultimately thrive. The allure of immediate gratification is a powerful trap. Short-term thinking prioritizes instant rewards over sustainable growth, leading to decisions that may feel satisfying in the moment but ultimately undermine long-term success. This myopic view is often driven by emotional impulses, fear of loss, desire for quick profits, or simply a lack of foresight. Individuals and organizations trapped in this cycle are constantly reacting to immediate pressures, neglecting the crucial task of building a solid foundation for the future. They become prisoners of the present, unable to escape the cycle of short-sighted decisions and missed opportunities. The inability to delay gratification, to sacrifice immediate comfort for future gain, is a significant handicap in any competitive environment. This weakness is often exploited by those who are playing the long game, who understand that patience and strategic planning are essential for achieving lasting success. The emotional trap is further reinforced by the human tendency to overestimate short-term gains and underestimate long-term consequences. This cognitive bias, known as hyperbolic discounting, leads people to place a disproportionate value on rewards that are available immediately, even if those rewards are significantly smaller than what could be achieved with a bit of patience. For example, someone might choose to spend their savings on an extravagant vacation rather than investing it for retirement, even though the long-term benefits of investing far outweigh the short-term pleasure of the trip. This preference for instant gratification is often rooted in a lack of confidence in the future. People who are uncertain about their ability to achieve long-term goals may be more inclined to focus on immediate pleasures as a way to cope with their anxieties and fears. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, where their short-sighted decisions ultimately prevent them from achieving the long-term success they desire. Another facet of the trap lies in the tendency to focus on easily measurable metrics, neglecting the qualitative factors that are often more important in the long run. This is particularly prevalent in business, where companies often prioritize short-term financial performance over long-term brand building, customer loyalty, and employee satisfaction. For instance, a company might cut costs by reducing employee training or sacrificing product quality in order to boost profits in the short term. While these measures may improve the company's immediate financial performance, they can have detrimental effects on its long-term competitiveness. Employees may become demoralized and less productive, customers may become dissatisfied and switch to competitors, and the company's brand reputation may suffer irreparable damage. The pursuit of short-term gains at the expense of long-term value is a recipe for disaster. It creates a fragile and unsustainable business model that is vulnerable to disruption and ultimately doomed to fail. Furthermore, the trap is often exacerbated by a lack of self-awareness. Individuals and organizations may be completely unaware of their short-sighted tendencies, believing that they are acting rationally and strategically. This is particularly common in situations where there is a strong pressure to achieve immediate results. For example, a manager who is under pressure to meet quarterly targets may be tempted to cut corners or engage in unethical behavior, without fully considering the long-term consequences of their actions. The lack of self-awareness prevents them from recognizing the trap they are falling into, and from taking the necessary steps to avoid it. Cultivating self-awareness is therefore crucial for escaping the trap of short-term thinking. It requires a willingness to critically examine one's own biases and assumptions, and to seek out feedback from others. It also requires a commitment to continuous learning and improvement, constantly seeking out new information and perspectives that can challenge one's existing beliefs. To navigate away from the trap requires a conscious effort to cultivate a long-term perspective. This means prioritizing long-term goals over immediate gratification, focusing on building sustainable systems and processes, and being willing to sacrifice short-term gains for the sake of long-term value. It also requires a commitment to continuous learning and adaptation, constantly seeking out new information and perspectives, and being willing to change course when necessary. The ability to think strategically and plan for the long term is not an innate talent, but a skill that can be developed through practice and discipline. It requires a conscious effort to break free from the emotional impulses and cognitive biases that often lead to short-sighted decisions. Those who can master this skill will be well positioned to thrive in a rapidly changing world, where the ability to anticipate future trends and make calculated moves is essential for success. Those who remain trapped in the short term will inevitably be outmaneuvered and left behind. The pursuit of long-term advantage often necessitates embracing a Machiavellian approach, a calculated detachment from conventional morality in the pursuit of strategic objectives. This is not an endorsement of ruthlessness for its own sake, but rather a recognition that the world operates according to its own set of rules, often indifferent to notions of fairness or justice. To succeed in this environment, one must be willing to make difficult choices, to prioritize long-term outcomes over short-term comfort, and to accept that not everyone will understand or approve of the chosen path. This requires a certain degree of self-reliance and a willingness to stand apart from the crowd, to resist the pressure to conform to popular opinion or to compromise one's principles for the sake of social acceptance. The Machiavellian strategist understands that true power lies not in brute force or intimidation, but in the ability to anticipate the actions of others, to manipulate events to one's advantage, and to maintain a position of control even in the face of adversity. This requires a deep understanding of human nature, a keen awareness of the motivations and vulnerabilities of others, and a willingness to exploit those weaknesses when necessary. It also requires a certain level of emotional detachment, the ability to make decisions based on logic and reason, rather than being swayed by sentiment or personal feelings. The Machiavellian approach is not without its risks, as it can easily lead to isolation, mistrust, and even outright hostility from others. However, for those who are willing to embrace it, it can be a powerful tool for achieving long-term success and maintaining a position of dominance in a competitive world. The key is to use it judiciously, to avoid unnecessary cruelty or exploitation, and to always be mindful of the potential consequences of one's actions. To truly master the long game requires a deep understanding of leverage, the ability to amplify one's resources and influence through strategic alliances, partnerships, and the calculated deployment of assets. This involves identifying key individuals or organizations that can provide access to critical resources, expertise, or networks, and then cultivating relationships with them that are mutually beneficial. It also requires a willingness to share power and control, to delegate authority to others, and to create systems and processes that allow others to contribute to the overall effort. The effective use of leverage is not about taking advantage of others, but about creating a synergistic relationship where everyone benefits from the collective effort. This requires a certain degree of trust and transparency, as well as a willingness to compromise and negotiate in order to reach mutually agreeable solutions. It also requires a keen awareness of the power dynamics at play, the ability to identify potential sources of conflict, and the willingness to address those conflicts proactively before they escalate into major problems. The long-game strategist understands that true power lies not in hoarding resources, but in leveraging them effectively to achieve a common goal. This requires a willingness to collaborate with others, to build strong relationships, and to create systems and processes that allow everyone to contribute to their full potential. Those who can master the art of leverage will be well positioned to achieve extraordinary results, even with limited resources. Cultivating patience is an indispensable virtue for those committed to the long game. The pursuit of meaningful goals invariably involves setbacks, delays, and unforeseen obstacles. The ability to remain focused and disciplined in the face of these challenges is what separates those who ultimately succeed from those who give up prematurely. Patience is not simply about waiting passively for things to happen, but about actively persevering in the face of adversity, continuing to work towards one's goals even when progress seems slow or non-existent. This requires a deep sense of purpose, a clear understanding of one's long-term objectives, and an unwavering belief in one's ability to achieve them. It also requires the ability to manage one's emotions, to avoid becoming discouraged or frustrated by setbacks, and to maintain a positive attitude even in the face of adversity. The patient strategist understands that success is not a destination, but a journey, and that the road to achieving one's goals is often long and arduous. This requires a willingness to embrace the process, to learn from one's mistakes, and to continuously adapt and improve one's approach as needed. Those who can cultivate patience will be well positioned to overcome any obstacle and to achieve their long-term objectives. The strategic deployment of resources is fundamental to long-term success, necessitating a clear understanding of one's assets, capabilities, and limitations. This involves allocating resources in a manner that maximizes their impact, focusing on areas where one has a competitive advantage, and avoiding areas where one is likely to be outmaneuvered. It also requires a willingness to make difficult choices, to prioritize some objectives over others, and to accept that not everything can be achieved simultaneously. The strategic resource allocator understands that resources are finite, and that they must be used wisely in order to achieve the greatest possible return. This requires a careful analysis of the costs and benefits of different options, a willingness to take calculated risks, and a commitment to continuous monitoring and evaluation. It also requires a certain degree of flexibility, the ability to adapt one's resource allocation strategy as circumstances change, and to be willing to reallocate resources from less promising areas to areas with greater potential. The long-game strategist understands that the effective deployment of resources is not about spending money, but about investing in the future. This requires a willingness to think long-term, to focus on building sustainable systems and processes, and to prioritize investments that will generate long-term value. Those who can master the art of strategic resource allocation will be well positioned to achieve their long-term objectives, even with limited resources. Anticipating future trends and adapting proactively is another critical component of long-term strategic thinking. The world is constantly changing, and those who fail to anticipate these changes will inevitably be left behind. This requires a willingness to stay informed, to monitor developments in one's industry or field, and to identify emerging trends and potential disruptions. It also requires a willingness to experiment with new ideas, to try new approaches, and to be willing to fail in order to learn and improve. The proactive strategist understands that the future is not predetermined, but is shaped by the choices and actions of individuals and organizations. This requires a willingness to take initiative, to be a leader rather than a follower, and to actively shape the future rather than simply reacting to it. It also requires a certain degree of humility, the ability to recognize that one's own predictions may be wrong, and to be willing to adapt one's strategy as new information becomes available. The long-game strategist understands that the ability to anticipate future trends and adapt proactively is not about predicting the future, but about preparing for it. This requires a willingness to learn from the past, to analyze current trends, and to make informed judgments about the future. Those who can master this skill will be well positioned to thrive in a rapidly changing world. Cultivating a network of trusted advisors and collaborators is essential for navigating the complexities of the long game. No one can succeed alone, and the support and guidance of others is crucial for making sound decisions and overcoming challenges. This involves identifying individuals who possess relevant expertise, experience, or perspectives, and then building relationships with them based on mutual respect and trust. It also requires a willingness to share information, to seek advice, and to be open to feedback. The collaborative strategist understands that the collective wisdom of a group is often greater than the individual wisdom of any one person. This requires a willingness to listen to others, to consider different perspectives, and to be open to changing one's own views based on new information. It also requires a certain degree of humility, the ability to recognize that one does not have all the answers, and to be willing to learn from others. The long-game strategist understands that a strong network of trusted advisors and collaborators is a valuable asset, providing access to information, resources, and support that would otherwise be unavailable. This requires a willingness to invest time and effort in building and maintaining relationships, to be a reliable and trustworthy partner, and to always act with integrity. Those who can cultivate a strong network will be well positioned to achieve their long-term objectives, even in the face of adversity. Consider the Roman Empire, a civilization that dominated the Mediterranean world for centuries. Their success was not built on short-term gains or impulsive decisions, but on a long-term strategy of calculated expansion, infrastructure development, and cultural assimilation. They understood that true power resided not just in military might, but in the ability to create a system that would sustain itself over generations. Roman generals were not simply warriors. They were strategic thinkers who understood the importance of logistics, engineering, and political maneuvering. They built roads and aqueducts, not just to improve the lives of their citizens, but to facilitate trade, communication, and military movement. They offered citizenship to conquered peoples, not out of altruism, but to integrate them into the empire and secure their loyalty. This long-term vision allowed the Roman Empire to endure for centuries, adapting to changing circumstances and overcoming numerous challenges. Their approach offers a stark contrast to the short-sightedness that often plagues modern decision-making, where immediate gratification often trumps long-term sustainability. The Roman example underscores the importance of building systems and institutions that are designed to last, rather than focusing solely on immediate gains. Of the Cold War, a decades-long ideological struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. This was not a conventional war fought on battlefields, but a strategic competition played out on a global scale, involving proxy wars, economic pressure, and technological advancements. Both sides understood that a direct military confrontation would be catastrophic, so they engaged in a long game of strategic positioning, seeking to gain advantages in key regions and technologies. The United States pursued a strategy of containment, aiming to prevent the spread of communism through alliances, economic aid, and military support to anti-communist regimes. The Soviet Union, in turn, sought to expand its influence through support for communist movements and the promotion of its ideology. This long-term struggle required careful planning, calculated risk-taking, and a deep understanding of the geopolitical landscape. The outcome of the Cold War was not determined by a single battle or event, but by the cumulative effect of countless strategic decisions made over decades. The collapse of the Soviet Union was a result of internal weaknesses, economic stagnation, and the failure of its ideology to compete with the appeal of democracy and free markets. The Cold War serves as a powerful example of how a long-term strategy, pursued with patience and determination, can ultimately prevail over short-term gains and impulsive actions. It also highlights the importance of understanding the underlying dynamics of a complex system and adapting one's strategy accordingly. The leaders who excelled during this period were those who could think strategically, anticipate future trends, and make calculated decisions that would advance their long-term goals. The parallels between empires, wars, and personal strategic goals are not accidental. All require a similar mindset, a focus on the long term, an understanding of systems, and the ability to anticipate and adapt to change. Whether building a business, leading an organization, or simply navigating life's challenges, the principles of strategic thinking remain the same. It is about seeing the bigger picture, understanding the interconnectedness of things, and making decisions that will benefit you in the long run, even if they require short-term sacrifices. This requires discipline, patience, and a willingness to delay gratification. It also requires a certain degree of detachment from emotions, the ability to analyze situations objectively and make rational decisions based on facts rather than feelings. The strategic thinker is not swayed by short-term trends or emotional appeals, but remains focused on their long-term goals. They are willing to take calculated risks, but only after carefully assessing the potential costs and benefits. They are also willing to adapt their strategy as circumstances change, recognizing that the long game is not a fixed plan, but a dynamic process of learning, adapting, and evolving. The long game requires a commitment to continuous improvement, a willingness to learn from mistakes, and a constant pursuit of knowledge and understanding. Those who embrace this mindset will be well positioned to achieve their goals, even in the face of adversity. The ability to consistently play the long game is rooted in specific psychological traits and cultivated mental habits. Impulsivity, the urge for immediate reward, is the natural enemy of strategic thinking. The brain, by default, often prioritizes immediate gratification over future gains, a bias that must be consciously overridden. This requires developing a strong prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for executive functions like planning, decision-making, and impulse control. Training this part of the brain is akin to training a muscle. It requires consistent effort and practice in delaying gratification. Simple exercises like resisting the urge to check social media, postponing a pleasurable activity, or sticking to a budget can gradually strengthen this mental muscle. Furthermore, the long game demands a high tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty. The future is inherently unpredictable, and strategic plans rarely unfold exactly as envisioned. Individuals who are uncomfortable with uncertainty are more likely to abandon long-term goals in favor of short-term, predictable outcomes, even if those outcomes are ultimately less desirable. Cultivating a sense of psychological flexibility, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances and adjust one's plans accordingly, is crucial. This involves reframing setbacks as learning opportunities, embracing experimentation, and maintaining a growth mindset, believing that one's abilities and intelligence can be developed through dedication and hard work. A fixed mindset, in contrast, assumes that abilities are innate and unchangeable, leading to a fear of failure and a reluctance to take risks, both of which are detrimental to long-term strategic success. The emotional landscape of the long-game player is also distinct. While emotions are not entirely suppressed, they are carefully managed and prevented from clouding judgment. Fear, greed, and anger are powerful motivators, but they can also lead to irrational decisions and impulsive actions. Developing emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize and understand one's own emotions and the emotions of others, is essential for navigating complex social situations and making sound strategic choices. This involves practicing self-awareness, empathy, and emotional regulation. The strategic thinker understands that emotions are data, not directives, and that they can be used to inform decisions but should not dictate them. Moreover, a key psychological component of the long game is the ability to maintain motivation and focus over extended periods. Long-term goals often require years or even decades of sustained effort. This can be challenging, especially in the face of setbacks, distractions, and competing priorities. Developing a strong sense of purpose, a clear understanding of one's values and goals, is crucial for maintaining motivation. When individuals are driven by a deep sense of purpose, they are more likely to persevere through challenges and remain committed to their long-term objectives. This also involves breaking down large, overwhelming goals into smaller, more manageable tasks, creating a sense of progress and momentum. Celebrating small victories along the way can provide a boost in motivation and reinforce positive behaviors. Finally, the long game requires a willingness to learn continuously and adapt to new information. The world is constantly changing, and strategic plans must be updated and revised accordingly. This involves cultivating a growth mindset, seeking out new knowledge and perspectives, and being open to feedback and criticism. Individuals who are resistant to change or believe they already know everything are likely to be caught off guard by unforeseen events and unable to adapt to new circumstances. The strategic thinker, on the other hand, embraces change as an opportunity for growth and learning, constantly seeking to improve their understanding of the world and refine their strategic approach. By cultivating these psychological traits and mental habits, individuals can develop the capacity to play the long game and achieve their long-term goals, even in the face of adversity. This is not simply a matter of intelligence or skill, but a matter of mindset and discipline. The capacity to delay gratification, to resist immediate impulses in favor of future rewards, is a cornerstone of long-term strategic thinking. This requires a certain level of emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize and manage one's own emotions, as well as the emotions of others. Those who are easily swayed by their emotions are more likely to make rash decisions and undermine their own long-term goals. The strategic player maintains a cool and collected demeanor, even in the face of adversity, carefully weighing their options and making calculated decisions based on reason rather than emotion. Cultivating this emotional detachment is not about suppressing emotions altogether, but rather about learning to control them and prevent them from clouding one's judgment. It's about recognizing the difference between a feeling and a fact, and making decisions based on objective reality rather than subjective perception. This also involves developing a strong sense of self-awareness, understanding one's own biases and weaknesses, and taking steps to mitigate their influence. The long game demands a clear-eyed assessment of one's own capabilities and limitations, as well as a realistic understanding of the challenges that lie ahead. Furthermore, the long game requires a certain degree of resilience, the ability to bounce back from setbacks and failures. No matter how carefully one plans, unforeseen events and unexpected obstacles are inevitable. The strategic thinker does not become discouraged by these setbacks, but rather uses them as opportunities for learning and growth. They analyze their mistakes, identify the factors that contributed to their failure, and adjust their strategy accordingly. This requires a certain level of humility, the willingness to admit when one is wrong and to learn from one's errors. It also requires a certain level of optimism, the belief that even in the face of adversity, success is still possible. This is not a blind or naive optimism, but rather a grounded optimism based on a realistic assessment of one's own capabilities and the opportunities that are available. The resilient player understands that setbacks are a natural part of the process and that they can be overcome with perseverance and determination. They do not allow failures to define them, but rather use them as stepping stones towards future success. They understand that the long game is not a sprint, but a marathon, and that the key to success is to keep moving forward, even when the going gets tough. Beyond the psychological and emotional aspects, the long game also requires a certain level of intellectual rigor. This involves the ability to think critically, to analyze complex situations, and to identify the key factors that are driving events. The strategic thinker is not content to accept things at face value, but rather seeks to understand the underlying causes and effects. They are constantly questioning assumptions, challenging conventional wisdom, and seeking out new information and perspectives. This requires a certain level of intellectual curiosity, the desire to learn and explore new ideas. It also requires a certain level of intellectual honesty, the willingness to change one's mind in the face of new evidence. The long game demands a commitment to lifelong learning and a willingness to embrace intellectual challenges. It is about constantly expanding one's knowledge and understanding of the world, and using that knowledge to inform one's strategic decisions. It requires the ability to see patterns and connections that others miss, to anticipate future trends, and to position oneself for long-term success. Finally, understand this. Those who fail to grasp the long game are mere pawns in a larger conflict, reacting to stimuli rather than dictating the terms of engagement. They are destined to be swept aside by the currents of history, their fates determined by forces beyond their control. But you now possess the tools to shape your own destiny, to navigate the complexities of the world with